I thought the worst part of my day was another exhausting 12-hour shift in the ER. I had no idea my own sister had changed the locks on my house while I was saving other people's lives. I stood on my front porch in my nursing scrubs, holding nothing but a paper bag with my untouched lunch, as my family told me I no longer belonged there. I walked away with nowhere to go. Less than a week later, $41 million suddenly appeared in my account, and my phone exploded with 91 missed calls from the same people who had thrown me out. That's when I realized losing my home wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of theirs. I spent that night in my car outside the hospital parking garage because I had nowhere else to go. The driver's seat was uncomfortable and I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma standing in my doorway wearing my slippers while my mother calmly told me I didn't belong in my own house anymore. By sunrise my neck ached, my uniform was wrinkled, and I still couldn't believe everything had happened in a single evening. Before reporting for another shift, I stopped at a 24-hour store and bought a clean set of scrubs, a toothbrush and a few basic things. I changed in the hospital restroom, looked at my tired reflection and forced myself to smile. My patients didn't need to know their nurse had spent the night sleeping in a car. They deserved my full attention no matter how broken I felt inside. The day stayed busy from the moment I clocked in. Ambulances kept arriving, monitors beeped without stopping, and doctors rushed from one room to another. Keeping my hands busy helped, but my mind refused to stay quiet. Small memories I had ignored for weeks suddenly started making sense. Emma had always insisted on collecting the mail whenever I worked late. She used to laugh and say she was only helping because I was always exhausted after long shifts. At the time I appreciated it. Now I wondered why she had been so determined. Then I remembered my mother asking the same strange question several times over the past month. "Did you get anything important in the mail today?" Back then it sounded like casual conversation. Now it felt different. Why had she cared so much about my letters? The questions kept circling through my mind while I checked charts and cared for patients. Every memory seemed connected somehow, but I couldn't understand how. During my lunch break I finally looked at my phone. 3 missed calls from the same unknown number were waiting for me. I almost deleted them without another thought. After everything that had happened, I wasn't interested in answering calls from strangers. A few minutes later my phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail. The calm voice on the recording said, "Ms. Grace, we've been trying to reach you regarding an account that cannot remain inactive. Please return our call as soon as possible." I frowned. I didn't remember opening any new account. I assumed it was another scam and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Still, the message stayed in my mind for the rest of the afternoon. Combined with Emma collecting my mail and my mother's unusual questions, it no longer felt like a coincidence. When my shift finally ended, I sat inside my car, stared at the unfamiliar number on my screen, took a slow breath and pressed the call button. The call ended with a simple request to visit a financial office the following morning. I almost refused because I still believed someone had made a mistake. After everything that had happened, I couldn't imagine having any business with a financial advisor. Still, curiosity won. I arrived at the address after my shift, expecting a short conversation that would clear up the confusion. The office was quiet and nothing like a busy bank. Soft music played in the background, and the receptionist greeted me with a smile before asking me to wait. A few moments later, a man in a dark suit walked toward me with his hand extended. "Grace? I'm James. Thank you for coming. And I'm sorry it took us so long to reach you." I followed him into his office, still convinced he was about to tell me someone had mixed up my information with another person's records. Instead of opening a folder full of numbers, James surprised me with a different question. "Tell me about your grandfather." I blinked in confusion. "My grandfather?" He nodded. "The weekends you spent with him after his eyesight started getting worse. Do you remember helping him organize boxes of old business files?" I smiled without thinking. Those memories had always been special to me. While everyone else thought Grandpa was too old to work, I used to sit beside him for hours, reading labels, sorting papers, and placing documents into neat folders. He always thanked me with my favorite pie afterward. I believed I was simply keeping him company. "I remember," I answered quietly. "I thought I was just helping him clean." James smiled. "That's what most people assumed." He opened a folder but kept it turned toward himself. "Your grandfather often spoke about those weekends. He appreciated your patience more than you probably realized." I stayed silent, unsure where the conversation was leading. He once told me that everyone else visited only when they needed something. You were different. You never asked for money, gifts, or favors. You simply showed up because you loved spending time with him. Hearing those words tightened my chest. I had never expected anyone to notice those quiet afternoons. James continued speaking in a calm voice. The work you believed was ordinary wasn't ordinary to him. He trusted you with responsibilities that no one else earned. Every document you sorted, every record you carefully organized, confirmed something he had believed about your character for many years. I looked at him completely confused. I don't understand. You will, James replied gently. But there are confidential documents that require your signature before I can explain everything. He closed the folder and slid a small appointment card across the desk. I'd like you to come back tomorrow morning. After that, I'll be able to answer every question you're carrying today. I left the office with more questions than answers, wondering what my grandfather had seen in me that no one else ever had. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying everything James had said about my grandfather. By morning I was standing outside his office again, still expecting an explanation that would make everything seem ordinary. Instead, I was about to hear something that would change my life forever. James welcomed me inside and placed several documents neatly across the desk. He explained each page carefully before asking me to sign. The paperwork wasn't difficult, but it was detailed, and he wanted me to understand every step before moving forward. After the final signature, he closed the folder and looked at me for a long moment. Grace, he said gently, what I'm about to tell you may be difficult to believe. I nodded, unsure what to expect. He explained that my grandfather had never believed money should automatically pass to relatives simply because they shared the same last name. Throughout his life, he valued honesty, loyalty, and kindness more than family titles. He believed people should earn trust through their actions instead of expecting rewards because of their relationship. Years ago, he quietly transferred ownership of several investments into a private holding company. At the time, those investments attracted little attention. Most people considered them average and not especially valuable. He rarely spoke about them and almost no one knew they existed. Then everything changed. A large international company recently bought the businesses connected to those investments. Their value had increased beyond anyone's expectations. James turned his computer screen toward me and showed me the updated figures. I stared at the number without speaking. $41 million. For a moment, I honestly thought I had read it wrong. I blinked several times, but the number stayed exactly the same. This can't be real, I whispered. James gave me a reassuring smile. It is real. Every review has been completed, every record has been verified, and your grandfather's instructions are legally binding. I leaned back in my chair, completely overwhelmed. Less than 2 days earlier, I had been sleeping inside my car because my own family had locked me out of my house. Now I was being told I owned assets worth more money than I had ever imagined. James allowed me a few quiet moments before speaking again. For now, I need you to keep this completely private. The transfers are still being finalized, and until everything is complete, it's important that very few people know. I promised I wouldn't tell anyone. After collecting my copies of the documents, I walked out of the building feeling as though the ground beneath me had changed. The city looked exactly the same, yet nothing in my life was the same anymore. I sat in my car trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. What I didn't know was that someone else had already discovered the truth, and the silence surrounding my grandfather's secret was about to disappear. I had barely stepped out of the building when my phone began vibrating in my pocket. I ignored it at first, thinking it was another unknown number or a hospital update. After everything that had happened, I wanted a few quiet minutes to clear my head before driving away. The screen lit up again. Emma. I stared at her name but didn't answer. Only yesterday she had stood inside my house while I was left outside with nowhere to go. I couldn't imagine what she suddenly wanted. The phone stopped ringing, but only for a few seconds. This time it was my mother. I let that call go as well. Before I even reached my car, another call appeared, then another. My cousin Daniel. My Aunt Rebecca. A neighbor who hadn't spoken to me in months. Even relatives I barely remembered somehow had my number. It felt as though everyone had decided to call at exactly the same moment. I finally sat inside my car and watched the calls continue without touching the screen. Every ringtone made my heart beat a little faster. Something wasn't right. None of these people had checked on me after I was locked out of my own house. Nobody asked where I had slept. Nobody wondered whether I had eaten or needed help. Yet now they suddenly couldn't wait to hear my voice. I switched my phone to silent and drove away. At a red light, curiosity got the better of me. I opened my recent calls. The list kept going. Emma had called over and over. My mother had done the same. Then came more names from every branch of the family. There were cousins, uncles, distant relatives, and even 2 old neighbors who had watched me standing outside my house the day the locks were changed. They hadn't spoken a single word to me then, but now they were trying to reach me. By evening, the calls still hadn't stopped. Some people left cheerful voicemails asking how I was doing. Others sent messages saying the family should spend more time together. A few simply wrote, "Call me when you can." Their sudden kindness felt forced. Before going to bed, I counted the missed calls. 91. I placed the phone on the bedside table of the small motel room I had rented for the night and stared at the ceiling. I hadn't told anyone about the meeting with James. I hadn't shared a single detail about my grandfather's investments. The only people who knew were James and me. So how had everyone else found out? That question refused to leave my mind. Then another thought hit me. Emma had been collecting my mail for weeks. My mother kept asking whether important letters had arrived. They had changed the locks before I even understood what was happening. For the first time, I wondered if those events weren't separate at all. Maybe they had been pieces of the same plan from the very beginning. I didn't call Emma back. I didn't argue with my mother or respond to any of the messages filling my phone. If something was truly happening behind my back, shouting at them wouldn't give me answers. I needed facts, not excuses. The next morning, I drove to the local post office before my hospital shift. I waited in line trying to organize everything in my head. When it was finally my turn, I explained that I believed some important mail addressed to me had never reached my hands. The employee listened carefully before checking the records. A few minutes later, she looked up with a puzzled expression. It shows several certified letters were delivered successfully. I frowned. That can't be right. I never received them. She checked again and turned the screen slightly toward me. According to our records, someone signed for each delivery. My stomach tightened. Can I see the signatures? After confirming my identity, she printed copies of the delivery records. I stared at the signatures. They weren't mine. The handwriting looked familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. I asked if there was any other way to verify who had collected the envelopes. The employee explained that security cameras covered the customer service counter. Since the issue involved mail addressed to me, a supervisor agreed to review the recordings. We waited quietly. A few minutes later, the supervisor paused the video and looked at me. "Is this the person you know?" My heart sank. Emma. There she was, smiling as she accepted several certified envelopes. She spoke confidently with the employee, signed the receipt, and walked away carrying mail that should have come directly to me. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. "I never gave her permission," I said softly. The supervisor nodded. "She told us she was authorized to collect your mail." Everything suddenly started falling into place. Emma always volunteered to check the mailbox whenever I worked overtime. My mother kept asking whether any important letters had arrived. The strange phone calls. The missing documents. None of it had been random. I left the post office carrying copies of the delivery records, my hands trembling. As I sat inside my car, I slowly arranged every event in the correct order. First, the certified letters began arriving. Then Emma intercepted them. After that, my family changed the locks and forced me out of the house. It wasn't about giving Emma a place to live. The house had simply made it easier for her to control everything addressed to me. As long as she stayed there, she could watch the mailbox, collect new documents, and make sure I never discovered what my grandfather had left behind. The realization hurt more than losing the house. This hadn't been a sudden decision made during a family argument. It had been carefully planned weeks before I ever stood on that front porch with my paper bag in my hands. For the first time, I understood the real reason they wanted me gone. They weren't trying to take my home. They were trying to take my future. 2 days later, my mother called again. This time I answered. Her voice sounded unusually warm as she invited me to Sunday dinner. She said the family missed me, everyone regretted what had happened, and it was time to move forward. She insisted there would be no arguments, only a chance to sit together and find peace. I already knew better. Still, I accepted the invitation. Before leaving, I placed copies of the delivery records, the certified mail receipts, and printed images from the post office security footage into a folder. I wasn't planning to start a fight, but I refused to walk into that house unprepared. When I arrived, everyone greeted me with bright smiles that felt completely different from the cold faces I remembered. My cousins hugged me. My aunt asked about my work. Even relatives who rarely spoke to me suddenly acted as though we had always been close. Dinner began quietly. People talked about sports, vacations, and neighborhood gossip. My mother served my favorite meal, something she hadn't done in years. The conversation felt carefully planned, as if everyone had agreed to avoid the real subject until the right moment. Then Emma sighed loudly and wiped away a tear. "I hate what's happened to our family," she said. "We're sisters. We shouldn't let money come between us." The room instantly became quiet. An uncle leaned toward me. "Families forgive each other, Grace." Another relative nodded. "You've always been the responsible one. Do the right thing." Someone else added that money couldn't replace family. I listened without interrupting. Not one person mentioned the day I was locked out of my own house. Nobody apologized for watching me leave with nowhere to sleep. Instead, they spoke as though I had created the problem. Emma lowered her head and pretended to cry. "I never wanted any of this." I slowly reached beside my chair and picked up the folder I had brought with me. Without raising my voice, I opened it. The first document slid across the table. A certified mail receipt. Next came another. Then another. I placed each page down carefully, giving everyone enough time to read the signatures. Finally, I laid several printed photographs from the security cameras in the center of the table. Every face turned toward the images. Emma was clearly visible accepting my certified mail at the post office. No one spoke. My mother picked up one of the papers with shaking hands. An uncle compared the signatures to the photographs. The cheerful expressions disappeared one by one. Emma's tears stopped almost instantly. I looked around the table before speaking. "You told everyone this was about money," I said calmly. "It wasn't. You collected my mail without permission, hid documents addressed to me, and locked me out before I could learn the truth." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. For the first time, nobody defended Emma and nobody asked me to do the right thing. The evidence on the table spoke louder than anyone in the room ever could. The family dinner ended without another word from Emma. Everyone quietly gathered their things and left, leaving behind a table covered with papers that had exposed the truth. I drove back to my motel feeling exhausted. I hadn't enjoyed proving anyone wrong, but at least I finally knew I wasn't imagining everything. The following afternoon, James called. "Grace, there's one more item your grandfather wanted you to have," he said. It wasn't included with the other documents because he asked that it be delivered only after everything else was complete. I agreed to meet him. When I arrived at his office, James handed me a plain envelope with my name written across the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. My grandfather had written every birthday card I ever received, and I would have known those letters anywhere. James smiled gently. "He wanted you to read it in private." I thanked him and walked outside. Instead of driving away, I sat on a bench beneath a large tree, carefully opened the envelope and unfolded several handwritten pages. The first line almost brought tears to my eyes. "Dear Grace, if you're reading this, it means life has already shown you who people really are." I kept reading. My grandfather explained that he had never believed money should automatically belong to the closest relatives. He had spent years watching how people treated one another when they expected nothing in return. In his eyes, true character appeared during ordinary moments, not during celebrations or when valuable things were involved. He wrote about the afternoons we spent together sorting files. I had always believed I was simply helping an elderly man organize old paperwork. He admitted those afternoons meant far more to him than I ever realized. "You gave your time freely," he wrote. "You never asked what you would receive. That told me everything I needed to know." My eyes filled with tears. Further down the page, he explained why he kept his investments hidden for so many years. If people knew what I owned, they would compete for my approval instead of showing me their true hearts. Silence gave me honest answers. Then I reached the sentence that stayed with me more than anything else. Real wealth never changes people. It reveals who they have always been. I read those words several times. Suddenly everything made sense. The locked doors. The stolen mail. The sudden phone calls. The family dinner. None of those things had been caused by money. They had simply uncovered feelings that already existed beneath the surface. By the time I reached the final page, I wasn't thinking about the $41 million anymore. My grandfather had answered questions I had quietly carried since childhood about why he always valued simple acts of kindness over expensive gifts or impressive promises. As I folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope, I realized it was the most valuable part of everything he had left behind. No amount of money could ever replace the wisdom written in those pages. The days after the family dinner were surprisingly quiet. My phone still rang from time to time, but the conversations were different now. Instead of asking for favors or pretending nothing had happened, several relatives called to apologize. They admitted they had believed Emma's version of the story without asking for mine. Once they saw the delivery records and the security photos, they realized she had been hiding the truth from everyone. Some cousins confessed they had honestly thought I was refusing to help my own family. Others admitted they had judged me too quickly because Emma sounded convincing. Hearing their apologies didn't erase the pain, but at least they finally understood what had really happened. Emma, however, disappeared. She stopped answering calls from most of the family and avoided every gathering. For the first time, she had no explanation that could erase the evidence. A few evenings later, there was a quiet knock on my motel room door. When I opened it, my mother was standing there alone. She looked older than I remembered. The confidence she always carried had disappeared, replaced by tired eyes and a heavy expression. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I stepped aside and let her in. For several moments neither of us spoke. Finally she looked down at her hands. "I should have listened to you," she whispered. "I kept making excuses for Emma because I've spent her whole life protecting her. After a while it became a habit. Even when I noticed things that didn't seem right, I convinced myself there had to be another explanation." I listened quietly. She wiped away a tear. "I failed you." Those words hung in the room between us. Part of me wanted to ask why she had believed everyone except her own daughter. Another part wanted to tell her how lonely it felt sleeping in my car after being locked out of my own house. Yet I stayed calm. "I can forgive what happened," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't instantly repair trust." She slowly nodded. "I know." I looked at her and spoke honestly. "If a window breaks, you can replace the glass in a day. But trust doesn't work that way. Once it's shattered, rebuilding it takes much longer. Sometimes people never get it back completely." She didn't argue because she knew I was right. Before leaving, she quietly apologized one last time. After the door closed, I stood by the window for a long time. I wasn't celebrating anyone's guilt and I wasn't interested in revenge. I simply accepted that some lessons come with painful consequences. My family had finally learned the truth, but understanding what happened was only the first step. Earning back my trust would take far more time than saying they were sorry. A few months later, my life finally felt peaceful again. I bought a small, quiet home just a short drive from the hospital. It wasn't the biggest house in the neighborhood, but every room felt safe because it truly belonged to me. No one could take that feeling away again. People often asked why I still worked long shifts as an ER nurse when I no longer needed the paycheck. The answer was simple. I had never chosen nursing because of money. I loved helping people on the hardest days of their lives, and no amount of wealth could replace that purpose. To honor my grandfather, I created a scholarship fund in his name for students who dreamed of becoming nurses but struggled to afford school. I knew he would have preferred seeing opportunities given to hardworking people instead of money being wasted on selfishness. One quiet afternoon, I found myself driving through my old neighborhood. As I passed my former house, I slowed down for a moment. The front door looked exactly the same. It was the same place where I had once stood in my blue scrubs, holding a paper bag with my untouched lunch while wondering where I would sleep that night. This time I didn't feel sadness. I didn't stop the car or look back for long. That house no longer felt like home because home was never just a building. It was the peace I had finally found within myself. I smiled as I continued driving. Emma had changed the locks on one house, believing she had taken everything from me. She never realized that her betrayal pushed me toward a future I could never have imagined. She closed one door, but without meaning to, she opened another that led to a life filled with purpose, peace, and hope. That became the greatest gift of all. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share your favorite moment in the comments. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.